Welcome to the View Magazine's Rebel Justice podcast. This week, we bring you Zoe Cohen, a self-employed mom who has had a successful coaching career and was previously a senior manager in the NHS. Zoe was one of the 51 people who broke an injunction protecting the fossil fuel industry and was remanded for contempt of court. All these people are in ongoing civil resistance as part of the Just Stop Oil campaign, whose simple demand is for the UK government to end all new oil and gas projects, thereby rapidly accelerating the transition to a safer, fairer world. Zoe brings us a privileged perspective of being a campaigner, but also a woman with lived experience of our criminal justice system. Zoe, thank you so much for taking the time to have a chat with us. I'd like to just start with you to tell us briefly about your background and what you do.
Thanks, Madalena. Good to meet you, and thank you for having me on the podcast. I'm Zoe. I'm 52. I'm a mum. First career was in the NHS. My second career has been being self-employed as a coach for the last 13 or so years, and I guess I'm probably in my third career now as an activist. Although I kind of reject that word a bit, but maybe we can come on to that. So I've been kind of in the process of transitioning life again over the last 4 years, so that I'm almost full-time, well, pretty much full-time a fair bit of the time, and sometimes slightly less than full-time some weeks, working with predominantly with the Just Stop Oil campaign and also some other areas of climate and related activism that I have worked on. I've been involved since the beginning of 2019. First got involved in Extinction Rebellion, and also something called Money Rebellion, which was part of Extinction Rebellion, and then went on to work on and with Insulate Britain, and now Just Stop Oil since kind of Christmas time. So it's a roller coaster.
So what sparked your interest in the fossil fuel crisis, and what made you join the Just Stop Oil campaign? And maybe you can go back to this aversion to the word activist.
Yeah, gosh, there's a lot to cover all in there. So I guess without wanting to go into too long a story, Madalena, it's not just the fossil fuel crisis. I mean, it's like much, much bigger than that, isn't it? But I've been, in love with nature since I was a little child. I think most, if not all, children, if they're given the opportunity, are in love with nature from being tiny, because when you're tiny, you don't see any difference between you and the dogs and the worms and the soil and the grass and the flowers. It is just life, isn't it? And we are life when we're little, and until we get socialized to separate ourselves from nature and everything that goes with that. And therein lies a lot of the problem, doesn't it? And I don't think I fully ever separated, so I didn't allow myself to fully kind of disconnect from nature, although I did to some extent, because that's what society does to us, isn't it? As well as being in love with nature from a very young age. I was brought up by a wonderful mum who brought me up as a feminist from a pretty young age as well. And I think from both of my parents, I soaked up a sense of social justice and a dislike of injustice. I've got Jewish heritage, at least on my dad's side. So both my dad's parents came from Poland and Romania before the Second World War to escape fascism. On my mum's side, my mum was part French, and her father helped Jews get out of occupied France in some way. I don't know the full details because my mum died before I learnt more. But so, I guess kind of concern for social justice, and it was kind of programmed into my DNA and my upbringing, consciously and unconsciously. And you combine that with the feminism and the love of nature, and it kind of takes you to a place where you just want to put your body on the wheels of the machine and make it stop. So it's been in me for a long, long time. And I guess that journey and took me into my kind of first career of wanting to work in public services, and I sort of was most drawn to the NHS, and I was passionate from quite a young age about health inequalities And that's what pulled me into the NHS, the kind of public health inequality agenda, which I still care about, right? But actually, the climate emergency and climate breakdown is the single biggest public health crisis nationally and globally. And that's, that's not me saying that, that's the Lancet and the 200 leading health journals. So yeah, there's many, many reasons to care. And I think it's just part of me. I think it's just a further expression of me and who I am and my values, what I care about. And I'm really unable to not do some of this in some way, shape or form. I hope that answers your question to some degree.
It does beautifully. I was wondering, Just Stop Oil, is it a kind of a branch from Extinction Rebellion? So is that how you got into it?
Yes and no. Extinction Rebellion, was started by a very small and amazing bunch of people I have massive respect for back in 2018, or maybe a little bit before, but really spring of 2018. And as I guess social entities do, they grow and they change and they morph and evolve and morph some more. That's what, we're like murmurations of starlings in the sky, aren't we? We're no different. We just kind of, morph and change. So I still count myself as part of Extinction Rebellion. I have a big trial coming up with a group of other women in a few weeks' time, which is for a significant Extinction Rebellion action that we did in 2021. So I still count myself as Extinction Rebellion. I still count myself as in Insulate Britain. I was, and to some extent still am, a spokesperson for Insulate Britain. So I guess some of the folk out of Extinction Rebellion kind of morphed into Insulate Britain, and some of those morphed again into Just Stop Oil. So there's quite a bit of overlap, but there's also quite a lot of new folk, like people who are in Just Stop Oil who've never done any inverted commas activism before. But maybe I'll answer that question that you asked before there about I guess I have a problem with the word activism and the use of it, and there are two things, I suppose. Like, to my mind, it's just, what's the opposite? It's passivity, right? And I'll probably misquote the quote here because I'm good at misquoting quotes, but it's Dante's word, not mine. But the kind of, there's something like there's no greater evil than staying neutral in a morally abhorrent situation. I've paraphrased there, but you know what I'm saying. So it's like, in this day and age, passivity is a pretty bad place to be, isn't it? So if you're not active about this agenda, not just climate, but the social justice crisis, the cost of greed crisis, the racism crisis, that all of it's interconnected. If we're passive about that, we're just a bystander, we're colluding with it, right? So we have to call it out. So I don't like it in that sense, but also you'll know, I'm sure, from a lot of the media, particularly the more right-wing the media, the more, and which includes our present government, of course, is they use the term activist as one of the many terms to other us, when actually we're just ordinary people. We're just ordinary people. I'm an ordinary 52-year-old mum, and we have hundreds of ordinary people from all walks of life, from ages 15 to 93 in Just Stop Oil, and from builders and carpenters to business owners to doctors, social workers, nurses, retired vicars, students, and everyone in between, right? So that it's just an othering term, and we really need to avoid or reject that othering, because it's how the system brings us down and belittles us.
Yes, that makes total sense to me, and I hadn't seen it in that light. The constant need of labeling people and put them in a box. Thank you for bringing my attention to that as well. The events of this week have brought a lot of attention to the Just Stop Oil campaign. The Daily Mail called your organization and activists radical eco-terrorists. What'd you say to that?
Can I swear?
Yes.
Oh, great. Bollocks. What else can you say? And following on from the previous point about the word activist, that's like low-level othering, but eco-terrorists, eco-crazies, eco-mob, eco-extremists. I've seen that eco-extremist recently as well, just today, I think earlier. I don't know who did that, but similar kind of malarkey. It's all othering, isn't it? It's all diminishing. It's all the same gaslighting that we get from the far right and the fossil fuel interests, who are basically the same people, aren't they? Our government is up to their neck in oil. Liz Truss used to work for Shell. She was an oil economist, worked for Shell. And the biggest donor to her prime minister campaign was the wife or ex-wife of someone who worked for BP. So it's like all insider stuff. And they've been exposed a lot, not enough, but to some degree that they're, following this disastrous economic nonsense they've been doing in the last week or so. So this government have kind of been to a degree outed, although not publicly enough, for following this far-right ideology of the so-called think tanks of the Institute of Economic Affairs, which are, they're if you're familiar with 55 Tufton Street, they're, based in Tufton Street, and they're linked to other organisations based on Tufton Street, like the Global Warming Policy Foundation, which is just another cover for another far-right climate denialist organisation. So yes, I'm sorry, a slight tangent there. You may or may not feel that's relevant, but basically it's all othering and it's all diminishing trying to disempower ordinary people in our fight against this tiny minority of far-right neoliberal extremists. They're, what these extremists and fascists do, the playbook is they project their horrible shit onto us all the time, onto us as in us, any groups who are trying to stand up to it, any group. So the thing that they are doing, they say that we're doing. That they do that not just us, but any groups. That's what they do all the time, and that's part of the fascist playbook, isn't it? And that's where we are. I'm getting a little bit off script here with the sort of wider justifiable messaging, but I'm just speaking from the heart about that's what I see happening, and I feel passionate about it. I also feel very scared as someone with Jewish heritage. It's just like, it just makes me feel even more scared that I hardly recognise the country I've been born into.
Yeah, no, it's disgraceful, and I do hope that more and more people are outed, because I do think the general public is not aware of most of the things that are happening, and all we read is these things that just make you see people who are trying to out them seem like the bad guys. So you should definitely keep speaking from your heart. Now, do you think, going back to climate injustice, that it affects women disproportionately, and if so, in what capacity?
So does climate injustice disproportionately impact women? Totally, 100%, in a whole myriad of ways. Like, I'm not an expert on this, but there is quite a bit of literature and research in these areas, but they're multifaceted areas, and I'll try and sort of like connect a few of the dots, but there are many, and I'm sure yourself and anyone listening, women listening to this, can know or recognise many of them, and probably more besides. But everything from women this is at the micro level, but it's kind of irrelevant. Women tend to have lower carbon footprints than men. There's interesting research come out in the last year or so. Even in the global north, women tend to have lower carbon footprints than men. But we tend to eat less meat, we tend to fly less, we tend to drive not so big cars or drive less, blah, 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 that kind of stuff. So women cause less, and in the global, globally, women tend to have control of less resource and make less financial decisions, economic decisions, don't they? So it's like whoever spends the money commits the carbon and commits the carbon crimes, if you like, because every pound or dollar or whatever we spend does harm in today's economy, because the whole economy is driven by fossil fuels pretty much, isn't it? So there's not many dollars or pounds you can spend that don't cause harm. So unfortunately, because we need a massive transition away from the fossil fuel obsessed economy. So there's all of that stuff. And then there's the fact that, girls and women are massively disproportionately impacted by climate breakdown. So again, I'm not an expert on this. There are academics who specialize on this, and there's lots of research, but right from girls in countries where there are droughts, like Afghanistan, for example, where drought massively exacerbates the societal breakdown and collapse has already been happening for the colonial invasions and all of that kind of stuff. But the massive drought makes it look so much worse. And then you've got the poverty and the hunger on top of that. And then you've got, what families do? They sell off their young daughter to get married to some 60-year-old guy or something. So that's, that is indirectly climate impacts, right? And it's the little girls that are prostituted and sold that get the hit. There's all sorts of other research that talks about, for example, how when food is scarce, it's the girls and women who get less of it. and suffer more. In communities in the global south where women collect water, the water gets scarcer, they have to walk further and further and further, and the girls then have to walk, don't go to school because they have to walk to collect water. These examples go on and on and on. And then you get the sort of secondary, tertiary effects of when you have conflict and radicalization and proper actual extremism, not climate activists, but actual extremism, which is exacerbated by drought, food scarcity, and all of that, and hungry tummies. And when that conflict happens, you get everything that comes out of that. You get rape and you get prostitution and you get, blah, 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 blah. And of course, it's girls and women who are more disproportionately affected there. So at every level, it's girls and women who cause less of all of this shit show and who get more of it. So, I hope that makes sense.
Of course. And it's heartbreaking.
Yeah, totally.
So how did you come into contact with the justice system? What was your experience of it? And do you think it was fair?
Okay. What a leading question. Do you mean the injustice system? So I guess linking to what I was describing about how I got involved in initially Extinction Rebellion, then Insulate Britain, then now Just Stop Oil. I've done actions that have directly or indirectly led me to being arrested 7 times now. So, which I don't know, some people sounds like a lot. Sometimes people like raise eyebrows and look shocked at a sort of, middle-aged mum like me having been arrested. But I compared to some of my colleagues in Insulate Britain and Just Stop Oil, I'm a novice. There's people with like 20, 30 plus arrests, etc. So not that it's about prizes and counting, because it really, really isn't. I'd really, really rather not have to do this stuff, to be totally honest. But when you really connect with the utter terrifying reality of the breakdown of our livable world, and you really feel you've got no choice, when you connect with the utter enormity and urgency of the situation. So, I've been arrested 7 times. First was April 2019 in the Extinction Rebellion in London, where thousands of people occupied parts of central London for 10 days. And there were 1,180 arrests, if I remember rightly. And I was one of those. I was really nervous at the time. I was one of a smallish number of people who, on a particular evening, were road blocking Parliament Square, the different roads in and out of Parliament Square. But I'm really, really proud that I did that because I overcame that initial fear, and overcoming that fear and coming out the other side, you kind of go, oh, that's it, is it? That's how the system controls us, with the fear of that. Really not that bad. I know that there's obviously a lot of people, including a lot of women and women of colour and people with mental health issues, all sorts of issues in their lives, that it's not going to be a good thing for them to do, right? But I'm a middle-aged white woman, and I guess I probably describe myself as middle class. Probably I didn't have a middle class background necessarily, but so I feel I need to use those privileges that I've got, and if I feel like a real obligation to me to use those privileges, take action and to speak out. Yeah, so I've been arrested 7 times. I think maybe 4 now for just doing really simple things like sitting on the road. Once I was arrested after having my home raided for being a spokesperson for Insulate Britain. So I was arrested and handcuffed and put into the metal cage in the back of the van in front of my neighbours. After having 7 police come to my house, and 5 of them basically do legalised burglary, which is kind of what a raid is, which is outrageous just for being a spokesperson, for daring to speak truth about the appalling fuel poverty and fuel poverty deaths in this country, and the lack of climate action, which are all connected, of course. I also, last April, myself and 6 other women carefully broke a number of windows at Barclays Bank HQ in Canary Wharf in London to call out the fact that Barclays are the biggest fossil fuel funder in Europe. And they, at the time they'd invested in inverted commas, something like 140 billion into coal, gas and oil since the Paris Agreement. So in the full knowledge of what they were doing, that was 18 months ago or more, and they're still doing it. They're still investing in existing coal, oil and gas, and they're still investing in new fossil fuels, as far as I'm aware, as well, which is morally bankrupt and economically mad, paraphrasing the UN Secretary General. So we have our trial coming up. We have a Crown Court trial, 7 of us coming up in November for that, for 2 weeks. So we have to convince the jury that of our absolute, profound, honest beliefs in what we're doing and why we're doing it, so that we avoid what could be quite a significantly long custodial sentence. So that's crazy injustice, isn't it? When those bankers are literally earning bonuses for the violent acts, and I do say they're violent acts because they are violent acts of signing contracts. The violence of the pen and the violence of the keyboard is vile. And that's, in my mind, that's my way of putting what we were calling out in that HQ building, the utter violence perpetrated by the people in that building and the board members, in the full knowledge probably of what they were doing, I would argue. And then most recently, I had a brief stay in prison. I was one of 51 people, men and women, taking peaceful action at a place called Kingsbury Oil Depot in the Midlands. It's the biggest inland oil depot in England, I think. And it's a site that an injunction was put on, which is like a kind of private law, in this case to protect the oil companies, fossil fuel industry, to stop people peacefully protesting there, as opposed to actually injuncting the bloody companies for destroying our lives and destroying lives and livelihoods around the world. So 51 of us sat peacefully at the entranceway of a road, literally just sitting on the tarmac. We were blocking traffic coming in and out of the site. We weren't blocking people. Workers could come in and out peacefully, completely non-violently, all the rest of it. And we just blocked vehicles. But we were arrested within about 4 hours or so of being there for breaking that injunction. And we were all taken to police cells, and then as a result of that injunction, we were then taken before a High Court judge within 24 hours, and every single one of us was remanded to prison. And most of us in the group spent a few days, nights in prison. I was in a women's prison called Foston Hall in Derbyshire for 4 or 5 nights. And there are currently, I think, 8 members or 8 supporters of Just Stop Oil in prison right now. Some of those people are people who broke the injunction on that day, and they were given custodial sentences because they'd taken previous action before, and the judge treated them more harshly. And there's also 2 amazing young people who have been on remand for a couple of months now and are remanded one of them is remanded until at least February for their trial. And they're innocent until proven guilty. They're on remand. They're innocent, and they are remanded for a ridiculous amount of time. That's the guy who's only 29, Josh Smith, and Louis McKechnie has been remanded since July, maybe coming out on a bail appeal hopefully soon. But yeah, I mean, shocking in terms of people in their 20s through to older people in their 70s are currently in prison for taking these actions. It's quite astonishing. You were asking me about the justice system, and I called it the injustice system. And I just wanted to make maybe 2 more points about the injustice and the nonsense of it all. I guess one's about the judiciary and the legal system and the judiciary, the utter craziness of the individuals and the system that they are part of and create together that criminalizes and imprisons myself and colleagues, ordinary people, for taking action which can only be described as morally the right thing to do, and is not taking action to hold to account and imprison the actual criminals. The fossil fuel companies, then the governments that enable them, and the media that enable them, and the banks that fund it all, et cetera, and the utter madness of it. And that there's a chinks of light in the sense that there was an open letter from, I think, about 200 or so legal profession, including some barristers, judges, and so on, who were joining the dots and saying that government's not taking action to avoid going over 1.5 degrees, which is like near impossible now, but at least with business as usual as they're going, puts the rule of law under threat. It threatens the rule of law, which is fundamentally what the whole court system, legal system, justice system is supposed to support, right? So that's the kind of ridiculousness that the vast majority, all the judiciary in terms of the sentencing and the approaches that they're using and their inaction towards the actual criminals here is bringing down the very system they claim to protect. So that's just one point I wanted to make. And also, I'm sure yourself and women listening or others listening to this hopefully already understand that the prison system in this country is ridiculously unjust, particularly for women, even though women make up a really small proportion of the prison population. My small amount of lived experience now is the majority of the women that I met, maybe all of them even in Foston Hall, probably didn't need to be there or shouldn't have been there. I can't see how the level of incarceration we were experiencing, being locked up for 23 plus hours a day, was going to help anyone do anything in their lives other than be mentally, physically unwell and not be able to be a useful addition to society or to themselves or their spirituality or the greater good or anything. So, yeah, and I would say that I would love to see a world in which we have deliberative democracy and citizens' assemblies, which would necessarily be 50% women. And I would love to see some of the women out of Foston Hall in that citizens' assembly, because, my God, they'd make better decisions than our government. I would trust them much more to make much better decisions, for sure.
Thank you so much for standing up for this, because I understand that it is important that people get arrested in a way, because that's the way of making people talk about it and bring it to the courts, right?
Before I got involved with Extinction Rebellion, so if I go back to sort of 2018 and before, it's like, I don't think I'd ever thought of myself being someone who would, sit down on a road and wait to get arrested. It never even, I don't think it enters into my head, although the nearest thing would have been like when I was a teenager, because I'm quite old. So when I was a teenager and Greenpeace were really in their kind of heyday of like doing the Rainbow Warrior actions and, people like attaching themselves to whaling ships and do all this really stuff. And I thought they were utter heroes. And I thought they were like a different category of person. But when Extinction Rebellion came along 2018 and then 2019, one of the fantastic, incredible things that the movement did, amongst others, was democratize nonviolent direct action and make it something that's accessible to, a significant number of ordinary people. Just all you have to do is sit on the road. As for someone, within Extinction Rebellion and Intellect Britain and now Just Stop Oil and all of those three concurrently, so there's people maybe like me who in some way or other wanted to put their body on the machine for a long, long time. And, I've done all sorts of volunteer work, like legal activism, polite campaigning for decades. And as soon as XR came along and I saw the original bridge blocking actions on YouTube, and then I just cried. I was just like, it was the first time I'd seen ordinary people behaving like the truth is real. And there's something super, super powerful. And even to this day, which makes it sound like it's eons, but it's like 4 years ago, is that when this week you were referring to the Just Stop Oil actions earlier on in our conversation, and like this weekend, when there've been ordinary people, often for the first time, getting arrested in public on Waterloo Bridge, for example, in central London. And you've had like the members of the public walking past, and young women or mothers with children or whatever, and they're like, they stop open mouthed, kind of like, because most people have not observed an arrest, and hardly anyone has observed firsthand an arrest of an ordinary person who looks and sounds like them being taken away, dragged away, carried away by police for utterly peaceful actions that are fundamentally to protect life. And it's really a moving thing. It's really moving for people to see. And they, some people look away or rush away or whatever. And that more and more there's support, even if it's quite passive support, there is more support. And I know over the time I've been, witnessing or out doing outreach whilst people have been arrested nearby, being arrested, and there'll be mothers with children, and the mothers will have tears rolling down their eyes. That they know that to some extent what their children are facing, and they can see people in front of them getting carried away. And I'm getting emotional now because I can feel it, because I got all of those memories of talking to families, and often it's the mums, as we know, and women emotionally connect with this much more on the whole. There are some guys that do, of course, but women mostly connect with it much more readily, I think. And that, especially if they've got children, they have tears rolling down their eyes, and they know we just need more people. And they know we just need way more people. We need thousands of people on the streets, thousands of us. And we can't wait much longer, We can't wait much longer. Sir David King said last year in a conference in Australia that, with the next 3 to 4 years determine the future of humanity. And that was a year ago. And that's not just one person saying that, tipping points are tipping right in front of our eyes right now. That the horror that is unfolding all over the world, from Pakistan to Japan to Cuba to Florida and all points in between, it's utterly horrific. And, here in the UK, we had 40 degrees only in July this summer. And that kind of summer wasn't forecast till 2050, and we had it 28 years earlier. And this net zero 2050 is bullshit. It's utter bullshit. It's far too little, far too late. And the keep 1.5 alive is bullshit as well. We're going to sail past 1.5 in the next handful of years. And we are just on like a fast track to hell at the moment. And this government they've gone into overdrive on pouring literal petrol onto the flames of that fast track to hell. It's like metaphorically and actually, we and our kids are locked in a burning building right now. And I am screaming to bash that door down. And our government are talking about what colour to paint the door, And now they've even, not only they're bringing back fracking, they're actively progressing more than 100 new fossil fuel licenses. And they're also instituting a review of net zero, because they want to basically fundamentally challenge, net zero and all the rest of it. And it's indescribable. It's indescribable. It's morally bereft. It's economically crazy. And I can't think of any other term that more appropriately fits it than sheer evil.
Zoe, thank you so much for opening your heart in this way and for sharing not only your insights, but your experience. I think it will be beneficial for so many people to hear. Just to finish up briefly, you spoke about numbers. You need more people to voice it. You need more bodies. Any more ideas of what each one of us can be doing to help the cause and to save our planet?
Absolutely. I guess, with absolute love and respect, it's kind of, it's not even saving the planet, it's saving ourselves. We've already done so much collectively. Obviously, the minority world and the rich and powerful most responsible, but we've already done so much harm. We've got to try and save what we can save now, and also save ourselves. To be honest, I'd love to say that writing letters, signing petitions, etc., makes a difference, but it doesn't really. It just doesn't. For tiny little things, tiny little actions, it can sometimes, but we're decades too late for that now. We have to make governments end new fossil fuel projects as a first step. There is so much that needs changing. There's much, much more that beyond the new fossil fuels that needs changing, but it's a first step. We need way more people in civil resistance. We need way more people in this non-violent action, this community of this peaceful mycelium of ordinary people just resisting this utter madness. And yeah, we do. And I guess what is tragic, but feels like the case right now, particularly with the shock doctrine that this government are, kind of implementing more and more and getting more and more extreme with, is that, many people are living through this kind of what feels like the foothills of collapse, isn't it? That's what I call it. We're in the foothills. Some countries, obviously, around the world have collapsed in climate and economic and societal senses, and this country is on the foothills of that. And it feels more like it obviously feels a lot worse than foothills to many people who are already struggling to get by day to day, and increasing numbers of people. But, someone who used to work in public services, I think public services are collapsing or on the brink of collapse, aren't they? And everything from drought and crop failure to public services falling over and everything in between. I think a lot of people are just cat in the headlights. And it's almost a horrible kind of sick byproduct of this shock doctrine treatment that is being done to us, that we are forced into this kind of cat in the headlight situation, so that we are literally unable to resist, but we have to, because there ain't shock doctrine is this, this is the thin end of the wedge, isn't it? That's being done to us right now. And it is being done to us. It's an intentional strategy. I mean, some of, the climate impacts are just now, we're reaping the rewards, in inverted commas, the sick rewards of previous emissions. The emissions that have been put out recently aren't even having their impact properly yet, because there's a lag time. So, we're reaping the rewards of a few years ago emissions kind of thing, because they take a little while to kick in fully. But the political shock doctrine is what we're combining with all of that. So I guess as a woman and a mum, I would particularly call out to women and mothers listening, and grandmothers. I'm not yet a grandmother, and I don't think I'll be, because my own daughter has said she doesn't want to have children, partly because of all of this, and she can't blame her, to be honest. But anyway, mothers, grandmothers, daughters, sisters, all of us, we need to bring our beautiful feminine energies to this resistance, and to, if we have any privileges that we can bring to bear so that we can get on the streets and potentially risk arrest, then I feel a strong obligation to do that personally, and I hope others listening do as well. If for whatever reason our protected characteristics or our lives don't allow us to do that, there are many ways to support that don't risk arrest. Whether that's from donation or doing behind the scenes stuff or whatever, there's lots of ways to support. So yeah, if you feel moved in any way by anything I've said, please do go to juststopoil.org and, come to an online talk or a face-to-face talk, and find a way to get involved in some way in, growing this beautiful, peaceful community of resistance.
And this concludes our podcast for today. Thank you very much, Zoe, for taking your time to speak to us and shedding a light on the urgency for action. We learned so much, and we wish you every success. The Just Stop Oil campaign is currently occupying Westminster in a daily protest during the month of October. For more information, you can go to juststopoil.org and attend an online or face-to-face talk. You can also check the links in the description. For more about The View, please check our website, theviewmag.org.uk. You can subscribe or see how you can support our ongoing work to make the justice system more equitable. Thank you for listening.